Growing up, we were always exposed to statements that our population growth rate is extremely high and that there must be family planning programs to make the society aware of the dire need to control birth rates. There were numerous programs, yet we, as people, did not understand the gravity of the situation. We were sheltered with subsidies covering our daily lives, and the situation continued to escalate just like a snowball, the one that the more it turns, the more it gets bigger. We have the land, and our population can be redistributed based on development projects, yet this human treasure needs to be catered to. Without our realization of the magnitude of the challenge, growth will remain modest. Good evening. You're watching the Business Insider here on Nile TV International, and I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events, economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back. Let's start with our first news item for the week. The government has announced its plans to buy 5.5 million tons of wheat from local farmers during the upcoming season. This is a 38% increase from its previous target of 4 million and would cover the equivalent of around a quarter of local consumption for the 12 months through the end of September 2022. State grain buyer GASC has called off 2 tenders in recent days due to a shortage of offers and high prices, while the country aims to achieve 60 to 62% grain self-sufficiency this season. Suez Canal revenues have increased by 15.1% year to date to post $545.5 million last month alone. The Suez Canal Authority increased transit tolls by 6% for most ships at the start of February, followed by another increase of up to 10% for all transiting vessels starting Tuesday. Canal revenues are expected to reach $7 billion this year, up 11.1% from last year's record haul. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Business Insider. Tonight I have the pleasure to be joined by Ms. Sahar El-Damati. She is a renowned banking and financial as well as an economic expert. Always a pleasure having you here on the show tonight.
It's really my pleasure. Thank you very much.
The topic of the population growth and its effect on the economy has always been a main theme in Egyptian policy making since we were growing up. This is something that is affecting the country, it's affecting the economy, it's affecting the growth, and this is our topic tonight. Let's start with this report and then we will start our discussion with our renowned guest.
A project for developing the Egyptian family was inaugurated on Monday, serving as a platform from which overpopulation can be tackled from a health, social and economic perspective. Launching the project was President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who stressed that Egypt's development is everyone's responsibility and that citizens must realize the seriousness of the challenges facing the country. Since 2014, Egypt's population increased by 14 million, laying tremendous pressure on the country's limited resources that must be invested towards combating poverty and ignorance, as well as enhancing people's lives and the quality of the human resource capabilities. The current population nears 103 million. That's over 5 times what it was in 1950. According to the Prime Minister, ever since the country's population was 60 million, the country suffers water poverty since the individual's water share ranges from 550 to 580 cubic meters annually. Overpopulation also affects the country's educational process, which cannot cater to the shortages of schools and their operation. A feat that requires over 20 billion Egyptian pounds annually according to the current growth rate. With 2.5 million newborns annually, enhancing lives is a great challenge, even with a 6% annual GDP growth rate forecast. The increase in this percentage is intertwined with the needs of societies, and in order to fulfill the demands of such a growing population, doubling this figure still falls short from delivering the quality of life that each and everyone deserves. The National Project for Developing the Egyptian Family and its executive plan focus on 5 pillars: the economic empowerment of women, ensuring free-of-charge access to birth control, promoting awareness, promulgation of legislation, and offering monetary incentives.
Welcome back to the Business Insider. Once again, allow me to welcome our dear guest, Ms. Sahar El-Damati, banking, financial and economic expert. Again, a pleasure having you on the show. Population growth is a topic that does not cease to be of strategic importance for this country. There are countries who suffer from underpopulation. There are countries who suffer from an over-aging population, yet we are of a population growth that is not met with the GDP growth that accommodates or that caters for this huge growth percentage. How do you view it?
Well, I definitely agree that it is a big problem, and especially now that Egypt is undergoing huge very limited resources when we started at the beginning. Now things are getting much better with reform. You have a number of strategies in place in order to grow with the country, not only from the economic point of view, but also from the resources point of view, in order to have enough money to cover for education, to cover for health, to cover for good training and development of human resources that we have.
Medical services as well?
Everything, medical services. And at the very same time also improving the status of life of the Egyptian people. I think the President, His Excellency, the President started way back when he said that my strategy is to add to the populated area of Egypt, which occupies around 7 million kilos, to add another 4 million. And they started by reclaiming at the very beginning, 3 years ago, 1.5 million faddans in order to cover requirements of the country in wheat and other kind of commodities. So that was the beginning. The second thing that they started to do is they started to open new cities. 24 cities are currently under construction. New housing for middle income classes and low income brackets. All of this right now already they covered something like 23 million, and there is another 100 million on the 100 billion, 23 billion at the beginning, and now 100 billion on the table in order to cover the needs for housing for middle and low income brackets. So these are efforts done that when you increase the geographical areas, that when you open new cities, then you will be able to provide at least the proper housing needs for the population. But that's not everything, because what you're looking for right now is a well-educated population. We are a very lucky country that most of the population, 60%, are youth population. So with this you can grow tomorrow. You know what I mean? Hence, what you need right now is, beside everything you're doing, is you need to put proper planning in order to plan the households, and that's not an easy matter. But this has to go through a lot of not only economic, not only money, not only just planning, also psychological studies, how to convince the people that you need to start, you need to plan your family. You just don't go ahead and have kids every year, 6, 7. I know personally some people who've been having kids every year and a half. That's incredible. So you need to change the culture.
The mindset.
The mindset. And this is what currently underpopulation.
And this has been met with programs decades and decades ago.
Yeah, it's not the first time.
That have not been met with a holistic strategic approach. It was met by programs. Yet the holistic...
Advertisements.
Right.
Yeah.
Yet the holistic approach that something like the National Project for Developing the Egyptian Family is embarking on, with the 5 pillars: the economic empowerment for women, ensuring free of charge access to birth control, promoting awareness, promulgating legislation, and offering monetary incentives. These are all important. However, the realization of the effect have not started to take place until we started seeing some subsidies being removed from the table. And this has been witnessed since 2014 until today. And the brunt, the economic brunt on the family is starting to appear on the household and the head of the household. First, before I get into this, the economic growth, the 6% growth, is this enough to cater for our population requirements, our population demands? What do we need to have?
Okay, I mean, I would like to say something. Now, when it comes to growth per se, economic growth, then what we look for is a private-public partnership, not necessarily partnership, or growing the public and private
Activities.
business and activities in order to be able to produce more goods and services. And this, and when we talk about this, we're not talking about an entity, we're talking about something, we're talking economically, we're talking in the banking environment, we are talking about the legislation necessary to needed in order to implement this. You're talking about the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization. You're talking about the manpower in order to decrease unemployment. So this is a completely big circle that that we are currently working on. And if we cannot achieve so much under the economic, we wouldn't have been speaking today about the 6%, while the whole world right now is suffering some countries from negative growth after the COVID-19. But Egypt did grow quite well, and the perspective or the projection for Egypt coming years is also to grow. When it comes to the population, as you rightly pointed out, we're talking about mindset. We started very strong campaigns of advertisement, if I recall, 15 years ago. You started by preparing people in different villages that they really have to, and sitting with them and talking with them about the importance of planning their own houses, their own households. But this needs to filter through more. So you need not only educational program, not only strong advertisements, not only, but you have to make them feel that in order to grow a child that can help himself when he grows up, that he becomes a good member of the employment population of Egypt, then you really have to have, and for the health of the mother, not only the health of the children, the health of the mother, I think you have to start even from schools. You have to start from universities. This is one thing. My point of view is that the economic conditions worldwide and in Egypt are becoming stricter, more difficult than before. From this perspective, and Egypt's strategy is to remove completely all kind of subsidies, because you have here basic structural problems. So by doing that...
Or by giving subsidies to those needing subsidies, direct subsidies.
Yes, yeah, eventually, because under our conditions, we have around 50% below the poverty rate. So you need to subsidize them up to a certain point when you can decrease the poverty level to the strategy that has been put before, which is below the 40% and 35%. So actually, I believe that along with this has to come some stricter regulations. I have a suggestion. I don't know whether it's...
Please.
My suggestion is that at this point in time, there are some subsidized products through the Ministry of Supplies that goes to the low-income brackets people. And these are the ones who really have the biggest number of kids ever. So if the government comes and say, well, I have very limited resources, and I need the resources in order to be able to open new schools and health and, I will not be able to cover you under this Ministry of Supply subsidy, except for 2 children only. And you're responsible for the rest. So you're forcing them in this situation to listen, to abide. That's my personal suggestion. Because, but so far...
This has to undergo legislation.
It has to undergo legislation, it has to go to the People Assembly and everything.
Especially now that with the international events and the effects on economies, we're going towards a situation where we're going to witness increases in prices, inflation, stagflation. So national economies are going to bear the brunt of international events. Let's talk about that for a while. How is the international situation affecting the economies?
Actually, I would like to go a little bit to the COVID-19, which was the start. During the COVID-19, huge sectors in the economy closed worldwide. I'm not speaking Egypt now. We're talking worldwide. For instance, airplanes, tourism, huge sectors closed. So you had a lot of people sitting in their homes. Others became unemployed, and so on. So that's number one. So accordingly, when I say that, it means their purchasing capacity became quite limited, since their resources was limited during 2 years period. And then in addition to that, you had a problem with the commodity prices, that when they found vaccines and people started to become vaccinated, at this point in time, a lot of people were willing, started going up to resume their normal life, and demand started to climb. Accordingly, commodity prices increased significantly at this point in time. There was a huge supply chain problems. There was a huge transportation cost.
rise in transportation costs.
Oh, significant, as a matter of fact. Just to give you an example, to give you a feel of what was going on, that when you want a ship in order to transport some of the goods, you used to get it for $2,000. It became above $20,000, which is more than 525% increase, abnormal. And witnessing also of energy prices increase, so that's added to the problem. All of this led to significant inflation, or the beginning of a strong inflation worldwide. Now the situation is even worse. Why? Because with the situation of Russia, Ukraine, and so on, we've seen today, for the first time in I don't recall how long, that the price of oil became 114.5. It went down again to 110, but again you crossed the 110 level. Can you imagine only oil, how much impact on inflation this is going to have? That's number one. Number two, gas is not available as before, because a big country like Russia used to provide more than 40% of the requirements of European gas, 35 to 40%. Major commodities, not only, I mean here, commodities related to industrialization, commodities needed for production of different goods and services like cars and so on, are primarily exported through Russia.
Petrochemical industry you're talking.
Platinum, a lot of this that goes into the production of cars and so on, and others. They have 12 commodities. And then you have also what we call strategic commodities like wheat. For instance, Ukraine and Russia, they provide 80% from the world needs of wheat. And there is a high demand, and the supply has been quite limited, so the prices have increased. And again, more problems related to the issue of the supply chain right now. To cure this, some countries started, or primarily Russia, they put a 20% increase on interest rates. By putting 20% increase on interest rates, what will happen? This will affect the banking sector immediately. The credit facilities will become very expensive. How much are you going to make in terms of profitability if you have to pay between 22–24% interest expense? This will decrease their margins substantially. In addition to this, the cost of the loans, the facilities for working capital, for fixed loans, for fixed facilities became quite expensive, accordingly affecting their production level. At the very same time, purchasing capacity went down.
Explain to me the stagflation term.
The stagflation term is a combination of inflation,
rising prices,
recession, people are not buying,
stagnation,
inventories are sitting there,
are increasing,
are not being sold. That's unemployment is growing. Purchasing capacity is down. That's the worst that can happen. Because to cure it, it's a very long process. And I don't think it affected the world except in very few instances. But this is the worst. This is the worst ever.
So, putting all this into context and bringing it back to the challenge of the population growth. Now you have demands of a population that is rising, and you have a government that is met with the challenge of catering to the demands of the population and dealing with the international events and its effect on the economies?
I'll tell you something, it's going to help in a way, I'm sorry to say that, but people will not be able to afford all those increases in prices that are happening internationally. And the country will not be able to cover, in terms of resources, provide more subsidies than they are currently putting, especially that the prices of main commodities have increased, especially the wheat and. Egypt also is an importer of oil. It's a self-sustained country when it comes to gas, yes, and we export gas now, of course, but when it comes to oil, we still export imports.
We're guided by the international prices.
Can you imagine with such a price, what will be the impact on the whole economy? By itself, this will curb demand. By itself, all of these factors will curb demand. And people will feel the heat that what they brought on themselves with so much population growth. They don't have any margin to enable them.
A number of the people that were interviewed in the presidential event, the national project, for the inauguration of the national project for developing the Egyptian family, when they were asked about how many kids they have and so on, and many of them said 5, 6, and so on and so forth. And when asked, would you do it again, they said, no, 1 or 2 would suffice because then I would have the resource, I would have the capability to teach them, send them to schools, to be able to live a better life, and so on and so forth.
Exactly, this is exactly what I have in mind, because everybody is realizing now that we are in a different world than what we used to be. This different world is going through currently what I call a trauma, economically.
And it brings back to mind the strategy of localization, a strategy that took effect especially after COVID-19, when countries and economies started to realize that globalization has been challenged and localization was important in order to cater for the needs of a population when need arises, especially when need arises, such as the situation of COVID-19 or what is going on in international events taking place.
It brings to my mind one important thing. When we do investment, we say, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Diversify.
Diversify. When you start a project, you work on different scenarios. In other words, what comes in my mind, you cannot be dependent on one source. You must always have a second way out in place. You have to put always second way out in order to be able to go out of the crisis. For instance, the SWIFT, the banking sector, very important tool used by more than 11,000 financial institutions. And it covers trade, it covers transfers, it covers treasury products, and so on. And all banks, financial institutions, they use it. A country like Russia, when they faced a problem in 2015, back 2015, then they started to build their own system. You have a backup system, which is small and internal, and it doesn't help very much. But they started working on it again with another friendly country in order to cater for the needs and not to hurt the economy. Okay? So this brings to my mind that you need to have not one plan, but also backup plans. You need to have not one scenarios. You need to study all possibilities. And at the end, I agree with you. Globalization have worked so far that you can depend on each other, okay, and help each other, and this would increase the trades between different countries and so on. But in one crisis, practically the world is coming to the worst economic and situations that I have personally encountered in my life. I've seen the global crisis. It was manageable. It was managed. There has been a lot of loss, yes. But this one, everybody is impacted. Those who are in the front line, or second line, or third line. Everybody is impacted.
How will we be able to cater for the current needs? Now, as has been reported, you have the local cultivation of wheat has been in place. It has increased. The government has given incentives to farmers to increase the land for the cultivation of wheat. You have its announcement that it plans to buy 5.5 million tons from local farmers, 38% increase from the 4 million that it sought before. So along that line, how are we targeting to cope with the challenges?
In this situation, okay, we have to be honest and straightforward. For instance, with such a high price of oil, this will impact the country, definitely, and will lead to higher prices. However, what I see is that the government have put a very good strategy in order to develop mining for petroleum. We have the biggest petroleum companies in Egypt exploring the possibilities of finding
You also have in the Red Sea as well.
In the Red Sea, and I think for the first time I heard also about the west area, which is near to Libya. I think this area also there are some possibilities over there, so they have been working on this strategy as well, and this is important. Number two, they have very strong relations with other Arab countries from whom we get this, and we can get them at, let's say, using by different financial methods of, you can put down payment and do different means in order to get the oil and schedule payments. So I think this is a way out of this problem. But you will have to depend, end of the day, on oil. I mean, that's an important thing. Commodities, I think that the government had a very good look when they 1.5 million dams were reclaimed, and that was the beginning. As if they saw it coming somehow. So I think that was a good strategy. The other thing is the strategy of using local products instead of imported products. My strategy is to import technology rather than to import raw materials. So I think those two strategies also are quite important from my point of view.
And the new importing regulations that were issued also go in that direction, if you will, with the challenges it presents.
The new regulations were forward-looking in terms, they have seen this coming. It was clear-cut that something is going to affect the markets. So I think this was forward-looking. We survived that before in 2015 for different causes, but we survived it and we got through it. And this is what we call economic cycles.
On that note, Ms. Sahar Al-Damati, banking, financial and economic expert, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
in the Business Insider. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being with us. See you same time next week. I'm Ayman Salah. Good night.